Howdy hey, how is everybody doing, and welcome back to Disney Daily. In today's video, we are going to break down Monsters at Work Episode 4, The Big Wazowskis. In the beginning of the show, we see Mike talking to a friend named Fungus in front of the bulletin board at work. He sees a paper advertising the Bowl-Off-a-thon, which is something that seems to be an annual event held by the company. Mike tells Fungus that he is excited to participate and even more excited for the prize, which is dinner for two at Harryhausen's. In eavesdropping, Rose tells Mike that there will be no bowl-off-a-thon for him, which leaves Mike dumbfounded. He asks her why he isn't allowed to participate, and she tells him that he still has to do his paperwork. Something that Mike clearly is not very good at doing, since this was something Roz always got on him about. Mike tells Rose that he doesn't handle filing his paperwork anymore, that is Fungus's job. Rose quickly responds to Mike and reminds him that while he no longer has to file paperwork, he does have to approve paperwork, due to the fact that this is now a part of his manager duties. Mike sarcastically asks her, "Are you sure you aren't Roz?" To which she responds, "We are complete opposites," which had me bursting into laughter. Just then, we hear a "Good morning, Rose" coming from a blue monster who looks exactly like Mike. We learn his name is Gary, and he walks up to the desk and explains that his paperwork is late due to him staying up all night practicing for the Bowl-Off-a-thon. And instead of Rose being angry about the late paperwork, she is completely understanding and tells him, "Don't worry your cute little round head, it's just paperwork," which leaves Mike stunned. The next scene after the intro song shows a bowling alley where we see our main mifters, Tyler and Val. Tyler is reading a book that he begins to tell Val all about. It's called Funny Business, and it basically explains all of the successful habits of funny monsters. He tells Val that in order to be a good jokester, he has to get in good with the bosses. And as the two try to look for the bowling ball in the ball return, they find Mike hiding inside. When the mifters ask him what he is doing in there, he replies, "Bowling, it's in my blood." I say to myself, "Mike, you are the ball. Be the ball." So I was the ball. Val then asks Mike if he is ready for the big bowl-off-a-thon, to which he replies, "Sadly, I will be missing out this year, and I won't get to take my schmootsy poo to Harryhausen." Gary, overhearing the conversation, yells out to Mike, "Hey, I thought you were banned from there." Mike tells him that the ban has been lifted due to his new power and responsibilities. Gary then takes the opportunity to brag about his bowling skills and tells Mike he is lucky he isn't playing this year because he would just beat him again. And Mike says that he may not be playing himself, but he is sponsoring a team, so he better watch out. As Gary walks off, Tyler turns to Mike and says, "Good luck with your team." Mike then begins to panic, telling Tyler he doesn't have a team and needs to find one immediately so that he can beat Gary. Mike goes on and reiterates that he needs top-notch bowlers, and this conversation gets Tyler's wheels turning. The next shot cuts to Tyler talking to Fritz, who tells Tyler of course he knows good bowlers. He mentions himself and says that they don't call me No Splits Fritz for nothing. He then goes on to name other members of the mifters. All of them are capable of bowling except for Duncan, who says he doesn't play but loves to eat the snachos. Tyler is very excited after learning about all of this information, and he turns to Fritz and asks, "Have you ever considered forming a team for the bowl-off-a-thon?" Fritz then goes on to tell him that they will form a team so long as Tyler will be the team captain, and Tyler agrees. We then see Tyler walking through the company hall with Mike and Sully. He tells Mike that he has found a team for him to sponsor and that they are very good. Tyler tells them that they are the champions and have been bowling for years. A very enthusiastic Mike says we are going to need a team name, to which Sully responds with, "How about the Big Wazowskis?" Mike is sold on the name and tells Tyler thanks for the recruitment. As Mike and Sully walk by Rose's desk, Mike overhears Gary making jokes about him. Mike tells Sully to go ahead without him and walks over to Gary and Rose. Mike leans over to Gary and asks, "What's that smell?" "Oh, it smells like defeat." He then goes on to tell him that he's put together the dream team. Gary just rolls his eyes. Mike then initiates a bet. He tells Gary whoever loses has to do the other one's paperwork for a whole entire month, and Gary agrees to the bet. We then cut back to the bowling alley. The mifters walk through the doors in slow motion, and if you look closely, you could see Cutter's bowling bag has her nickname on it, which is No Gutter Cutter, and Val also has one that says Pin Pal Val on it. The team is right away greeted by Tyler, who tells them that he is excited to be the captain of the team and he can't wait to start bowling. Val, however, seems to be on to Tyler. She says, "I know you are doing all of this to get on Mike's good side and become a jokester." Tyler is shocked. She then says, "I'm just kidding, like you'd ever do anything that blatantly selfish." You see, from the start, Val and the other Mifters have thought very highly of Tyler and see him as a team player. But deep down inside, Tyler is out for himself and will do anything he can to get what he wants. Which is honestly why I haven't really been a big fan of his. In fact, if I'm being honest, he has been my least favorite new monster out of all of them. Now, as the monsters begin to bowl, Tyler is up first and he gets a strike. The monsters celebrate and it's then Fritz's turn. Fritz opens up his bowling bag, which reveals a gold shiny bowling ball that looks similar to that of a disco ball. As Fritz gets ready to release his ball, he ends up throwing his whole entire body down the lane instead. Cutter then takes her turn and launches her bowling ball across several other lanes and directly into the gutter. And if all that horrible bowling wasn't enough, Val attempts to bowl but releases her ball painfully slow down the lane with it tapping only one pin. The team celebrates, but Tyler's face is filled with panic. He turns to them and says, "Hey guys, I thought you were good." And Fritz tells him, "No, that's why we never enter this contest, because we stink." We then cut to our favorite monsters, Smitty and Needleman, who seem to be the MCs of the bowl-off-a-thon. They welcome everyone to the first day of the competition, and they introduce the first game between the Sliding Slugs and the Big Wazowskis. The first member from the opposing team is up, and since they are all slugs, they move incredibly slow. So slow, in fact, that a whole day and a half goes by. As the monsters all begin to wake up, Needleman and Smitty announce that the slugs have run out of time and that the Big Wazowskis have scored their first win. The next scene cuts to Mike, who is bragging to Gary about the game. He calls it a bloodbath and adds a new component to their bet. Mike says not only does the loser have to do the paperwork, but they have to be the winner's butler for a whole entire month also. We then cut to the next bowling game between the Pinheads and the Big Wazowskis. Fritz is up first this time, and as he releases the ball, it flies backwards and actually knocks out the other team, who is carried out in a stretcher. Due to this knockout, the Pinheads have to forfeit, and the Big Wazowskis secure another victory. The scene then cuts to Mike and Tyler walking down the laugh floor. Mike tells Tyler that he is excited for the final game, which will take place the next day against Gary, and that he will owe him big if they do in fact beat Gary. Tyler asks Mike hesitantly, "Well, what will happen if they lose?" Mike doesn't want to hear another word and tells him to not even think like that. He also reveals his big bet with Gary and tells Tyler that he believes in him as he disappears behind one of the laugh doors. Tyler is beyond nervous, knowing very well now that his team is horrible, and Duncan is nearby spying on the whole entire conversation between Mike and Tyler. We then see Tyler behind the wheel of the company car talking to himself. Just then he is interrupted by a creepy voice that comes on over the intercom. Tyler asks, "Duncan, is that you?" To which he replies, No, it is not," and tells Tyler to follow the signs. As Tyler follows the signs, he comes to one that is supposed to say secret door. As he goes through the doorway, he comes face to face with Duncan, who insists that he is not Duncan, but in fact a mystery voice. Just then, Smitty and Needleman bust into the room, turning on the lights, and ask Duncan if he is done with his secret room. Duncan is furious and tells them to leave and turn off the lights. As the two teenage monsters leave, Duncan asks, "Where were we?" To which Tyler replies, "Pro bowlers? We were talking about pro bowlers." Duncan then tells Tyler he can get him some bowlers so long as he agrees to sign a contract saying he will never try and take Fritz's position as head of the Mifters. Now, for those who may not remember, Duncan wants to be the one who eventually takes Fritz's position when he eventually leaves the company and believes Tyler is there to steal it from him, even though Tyler has shown no interest in the position from day one. Tyler agrees and signs the contract. Duncan begins to do his evil laugh and shouts, "It is done!" which prompts Smitty and Needleman to come back into the room, thinking the room is now available for use. The two monsters come in again, and Smitty tells Duncan they need the room for Fright Club. Needleman covers his mouth and says, "Don't tell him that. Did you forget the first rule of Fright Club?" Which was honestly a well-written and funny reference to the classic 1999 movie Fight Club starring Brad Pitt. The next shot shows Tyler in the break room with the Mifters. He tells them that the last bowling match has been canceled. He then suggests to the monsters that they go to town for lunch, and the team takes off. Or so he thinks. We then see Smitty and Needleman, who are announcing the final game between Team Gary's and the Team Big Wazowskis. As Mike begins to look around the room, he realizes that he doesn't have any players and asks Tyler why none of the team is present. As Tyler begins to explain, the replacements walk in just in time for the game. They look ferocious and professional and enter the room with a lot of confidence. One of the monsters even eats an entire bowling ball. As Tyler introduces himself as the team captain to the replacements, he turns around to see the sad and disappointed faces of Val, Cutter, and Fritz, who had not left for lunch but instead stayed behind. The Mifters confront Tyler and say, "You lied to us," and Tyler initially tries to cover up his tracks, but then quickly tells them that he did replace them, but he only did it because he didn't want them to feel hurt after losing the game. Fritz then says out loud, "This hurts way more, Tyler." Mike then rejoins the conversation. The head of the replacement team, who was also the same monster who ate the bowling ball, tells Mike that they will be leaving because they do not play for a captain who betrays his team. As they begin to leave, Mike panics and asks Tyler what is the plan. Gary laughs and Mike begins to envision what being Gary's butler would look like. Tyler then fesses up to everything and admits to Mike that he just wanted to impress him and apologizes to his team for not being a proper teammate. And just as the forfeit is about to be announced, Fritz gives a pep talk about being a team and how they stick together even when one of them makes a mistake. He then asks Tyler if he is part of their team, and Tyler responds, "I'm more than that, I'm the team captain," and that he will lead them to victory. Fritz then politely reminds Tyler that they stink, to which Tyler responds, "That's okay, we will just stink our way to victory." We then cut to Gary, who bowls a perfect strike, but Tyler then responds with a strike himself. The next monster up on the Garys also gets a strike, to which Cutter then responds with a strike of her own, thanks to a little coaching from Tyler. The Garys then respond with yet another strike, and it is Fritz's turn. As he gets up to bowl, Tyler whispers to him, "Don't let go of the ball." As Fritz slides across the lane, he successfully manages to knock down all of the pins, resulting in a strike. The next member of the Garys not only gets a strike, but destroys most of the pins. Now it is Val's turn, the last of the monsters to bowl. She does her normal roll and only manages to knock over one pin. As she begins to celebrate the moment by jumping up and down, her jump actually causes the pins to knock over and she achieves a strike for the team. Our favorite MCs then reveal that the tournament has ended in a tie between the two teams. As the Mifters celebrate between themselves, Mike and Gary are excited that neither one of them has to be a butler, but realize that they still have a dinner for two at Harryhausen's that needs to be used. The next scene then cuts to Mike ordering from the restaurant, and instead of being there with Celia as he had hoped, he is there with Gary, as the two have clearly agreed to share the prize meal. This episode was definitely a filler in my opinion. There was no major character development that happened in my opinion, but it did show how the Mifters are starting to become more and more of a close unit. Please let me know what you thought about this episode in the comments below and what you hope to see in the series going forward. Remember that you can catch new episodes of Monsters at Work every Wednesday on Disney+. As always, thanks for being my guest here at Disney Daily. Until next time.